The parkour in recent Assassin's Creed games is terrible. This is a comment I've seen a lot and I've always kind of agreed with, but it got me wondering, after all these years, which game truly had the best parkour? And have we actually been blinded by nostalgia at all? So I decided to find out by revisiting the traversal in every single game. And at the end, we will finally answer the question to what game truly did it best. And yeah, it was actually pretty interesting to say the least. So the original Assassin's Creed came out way back in 2007, and it basically established a blueprint for the entire series. Well, sort of. And this was one of the first games I really remember, aside from Spider-Man, that really pushed traversal, allowing you to treat the world like it was an extension of your character almost. And don't let its age make you assume it's utter dogshit. The movement in AC1 feels incredibly deliberate. You feel the weight behind every single jump, and every climb forces you to respect the game's physics. And there is a stiffness to it, and some of the animations do feel basic as hell by today's standards, and it's not exactly refined, but that's honestly part of its charm. The system doesn't do all the work for you, and it demands precision and your direct input. And not everyone likes this level of control, but it's something a lot of fans since the beginning really praise, and I can see why. Back then, parkour up or down simply didn't exist, and the targeting system just naturally wants you to go upwards, so dropping down isn't so easy without taking damage. But once you master this, you start to see a system with way more depth than you first thought, and it rewards players who actually take the time to learn it. And although it can feel repetitive, the setting of Jerusalem is still really fun to explore, and it's massively nostalgic for me, even if it looks a little dated now. Ultimately, AC1's parkour is imperfect, and it's a long way from the systems we are yet to see, but it punishes mistakes and respects players' skill, and it's way better than you might assume despite it being 18 bloody years old. But the next game introduced an assassin that would redefine the series, and is what many remember as the absolute best parkour. But does nostalgia play a big part? When Assassin's Creed 2 released, it made some major changes. With Ezio, the movement became so much faster, way more fluid, and a lot more expressive than Altair's weighty style. And a huge part of that came down to one crucial new move, the climb leap. And this let you spring upwards in the middle of a climb to grab a ledge that would have been just out of reach, and it totally changed the pacing, making climbing feel so much faster. And when you combine that with Ezio just having a faster run speed in general, the whole system just feels lighter and way more agile. But that speed did kind of come with a trade-off. The physics are a lot more floaty, and the precision seen in the first game can feel lost at times, as you'd end up making these jumps that felt a little exaggerated and a bit out of your control. Linking moves like vaults and grabs is definitely smoother, but the system isn't perfect, and you can still spot janky ass animations here and there, and it's still very unforgiving. But there is one area where AC2 really shines. Cities like Florence and Venice feel like they were literally built to be parkour playgrounds, unlike the other games we are yet to revisit. And the feeling of stringing together a parkour run across the rooftops of Venice is still an all-time classic moment that I'm sure you love as much as me. And look, AC2's parkour has some rough edges you'll notice if you replay it now, but the way it blended speed, style, and that incredible world design created something that many people still feel is the gold standard for the entire series. But what if that revolutionary formula could be refined even further? The next game promised just that, but in chasing perfection, did it lose some of the magic that made AC2 so good? Assassin's Creed Brotherhood arrived in 2010, and instead of a massive overhaul, it focused on refining the parkour into what a lot of people call absolute peak. Now you've got Ezio as a full-blown master assassin, and the city of Rome, which is bloody brilliant, and a single enormous map that felt more expansive and lived in than anything the series had done before. And to get around this city, Ubisoft added some new toys. For the first time, you could ride your horse right through the city streets and absolutely batter bellends. They added lifts, which let you zip straight to a rooftop to keep your momentum going, and to solve the problem of getting down from high places quickly, You can even use a parachute. The core movement is still that familiar AC2 feel, but it just feels a bit faster. Although this damn animation of putting yourself up can ruin momentum, and it does hinder it slightly. But personally, I think Brotherhood made the right improvements for its time, and it's definitely an enjoyable experience even now, but not without its unforgiving and clunky aspects shining through. And whether this was really peak parkour is still very much up for debate, as the next entry added something that changed traversal forever, and depending on who you ask, it either perfected it or kind of ruined it. And in 2011, we got Assassin's Creed Revelations, and this time we're following an older Ezio to Constantinople, which I've now butchered for the 89th time in my videos, and he's been given one of the most controversial tools, the hook blade. And as the name suggests, it's part hook and part blade. Yeah, no shit. But its impact on getting around was kind of massive. It basically extended Ezio's reach, letting him pull himself up ledges faster and make longer jumps. But the biggest game changer was the zip lines that were suddenly everywhere, creating a much faster way to explore. And again, it's another setting that's designed complements the parkour really well, and the added benefit of delivering a royal twatting is another plus. Now, some fans thought this was a brilliant evolution of the parkour, instead of milking it pissless and changing nothing, but on the other side, many players argued this was the moment automation started creeping in. But I actually think the hook blade helps stop your momentum from being ruined a lot of the time by this piss-slow animation seen in previous games, although I can see the argument for it feeling like a cheat code. But overall, Revelations feels like the final evolution of that classic parkour system, and it pushed speed and utility to their absolute limits, but it was also a sign that the series was shifting towards a more automated and noob-friendly movement, and it's probably the last major peak classic era traversal game before the series changed direction. And despite its criticism, I still like it, and I think it's aged pretty well. But after the Ezio trilogy, everything really did change. The world, the movement, and even the engine it was built on. And some fans say this is where the series truly peaked, whilst others say it lost its soul. So Assassin's Creed 3 dropped in 2012, and it made one of the biggest changes yet. Powered by the new Anvil Next engine, this wasn't just a new setting, it was a complete shift to how movement felt. We left the dense cities for an American frontier, and with our new assassin Connor came a new parkour system that was both revolutionary and deeply controversial. On one hand, the movement never looked better. The animations are incredibly fluid and just so damn smooth in ways previous games just never achieved, with the standout feature being tree running. Chaining moves together through the forest was a genuinely fun experience, letting you flow from branch to branch like a predator almost. Yeah, not one of these ones though. But how impressive it looked did come at a cost, and that's control. The system is massively simplified, mapping most of the free running to a single button and adding guardrails that would physically stop you from making a jump that could obliterate your ankles. And this makes parkour feel way more noob-friendly than before, letting any player look and feel like a master assassin in no time, instead of looking like a right knobhead for the first 5 hours whilst you learn how to play. And for veterans of the series, I can see why this is so disappointing. Also, for the first time, the environment feels like it's working against the parkour. The setting might be unique and stunning, but it's just not dense enough like previous games. Ultimately, AC3's parkour is either great or disappointing depending on who you are. It's smooth, beautiful to watch, and I like its new ideas despite the flawed map design, but it did sacrifice the challenge that made earlier games so rewarding, so I actually don't think that makes it inherently bad, and it does feel way less dated to play now compared to previous games. Also, imagine telling those players who hated it back in 2012 what parkour would become a decade later. Jesus weeped. However, the next game is often known as the best in the series, but with it trading cities for open seas, is the parkour really as good as we thought? And by the way, if you do want to play these legendary games for yourself, or perhaps even the recent AC games, do not pay stupid prices like a knobhead. I use Instant Gaming to grab my game keys, and it's way cheaper than Steam and the PlayStation and Xbox store. You literally get your games instantly, no messing about, and it works straight away. I've been using them for years, and it's fast, easy, easy, and it saves you getting royally done over. Whether you're grabbing Shadows, Syndicate, or any other AC, just click the link down below in the description and you'll save some cash, and it also helps out the channel too. So after trekking through forests in AC3, we set sail for the Caribbean in 2013's Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, and it's running on the same Anvil Next engine, but the parkour this time just feels way smoother. Eddie feels like a bit of a beast, and right off the bat, his animations are so much more refined and cinematic. I also feel like most of the clunkiness seen in previous games feels almost gone by this point. However, yes, the Caribbean setting is absolutely stunning, but let's be real, it's not exactly a parkour playground. You've got jungles, small towns, and lots of bloody water, which means you're spending a lot of time on your feet and on your ship rather than climbing buildings. And the only standout place that truly feels great for traversal is Havana, but where Black Flag really innovates is on the water. Traversing on your ship is really damn fun. Swinging from a rope to board an enemy ship or heading to the top to dive into the ocean just feels so perfect. But it also can be frustrating, as sometimes jumping on your ship at port can be complete AIDS, and if you mistime a jump high up on your ship, you're pretty much dead as a dodo. Nonetheless, I think parkour on ships is where the game truly shines, and in the end, the movement here is less about raw technical skill and just more about flair. It swaps out those complex, dense environments for the open sea, and that totally unique feeling of being an assassin-pirate hybrid. But before the series would reinvent itself, Ubisoft then released a game that kind of went under the radar, and some fans say it actually did parkour even better. In 2014, Assassin's Creed Rogue dropped, and because of its really short development time, a lot of people just wrote it off as a Black Flag reskin. But what might surprise you is how good the movement actually is, and how it refines it all in all the right areas. There isn't lots of changes, but this time there are zip hooks and rope lines, side ejects do feel easier to perform, and Shay's animations feel quicker, a bit zesty, more direct, and the whole system just feels a bit more responsive. It doesn't add any new moves, but the ones it shares with Black Flag just feel even more polished. But while Rogue is a bit of a dark horse, and it does technically have more polished parkour than Black Flag, its well designed just can't keep up, and I just find it nowhere near as fun to explore. But what came next changed Assassin's Creed forever. A game some call absolute peak parkour, but has it become overhyped? In 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity came out with what was meant to be the most ambitious next-gen overhaul of parkour the series had ever seen. Now, we all know its launch was notoriously buggy, filled with freaks, but over the years, opinions have really turned around to the point where the game has even been called overrated. The single biggest change was splitting traversal into parkour up and parkour down, and this was pretty huge, as it gave you direct control not just going up, but also a fluid way down, solving an issue that had been there since day one. And these controlled descents weren't just functional either, as they also felt incredibly good, and you kind of just feel like a total badass. And visually, the game is a bit of a masterpiece. It has so many new handcrafted animations all blended together, which made Arnu's movement feel incredibly smooth, varied, and weighty. But where things get even more impressive is the setting. Oh no, God. Paris really is amazing, and being able to jump through endless interiors filled with NPCs is a feature I still miss till this day, and this has to be one of my favourite AC settings, and maybe you can relate. However, it's not all good, and it can be easy to be misled by the amazing looking animations and the setting. Arnu does feel ridiculously unpredictable at times, and he can get stuck on random objects, refuse to jump, or leap in a direction you did not intend, and this can get on your tits regardless of how many hours you put into it. Still though, when it works, I really don't think this game is overrated. The combination of amazing animations, such an immersive world, and a map so perfectly designed for parkour is exactly what you want from an AC game. And if you love the classics like me, I totally understand why so many people believe this has the best parkour in the series. But before we can decide, we're definitely not done yet, because next, Ubisoft would add a new controversial controversial mechanic, and for the first time, more than one assassin to play as, and this massively divided fans of the series. So after the mixed reviews of Unity at the time, Ubisoft shifted gears again with Assassin's Creed Syndicate in 2015, and you can really tell how Ubisoft were trying to make it far more user-friendly at the time. Maybe I'm being a tad biased as I'm personally from the UK, but the setting of London looks amazing and it's bloody huge. The streets are wider, the buildings are taller, and trying to climb everything the old-fashioned way would be a real ball ache. So the new rope launcher was their new solution, and you can instantly shoot a zip line up to a roof or across a street, and it's fast, it's fun, and you're essentially playing as this monotone knobhead. The actual climbing and running, which is built on Unity's foundation, does seem to have slightly faster transitions, and it does feel more responsive and less unpredictable, but you can tell how they sacrificed that grounded sense of weight to get there, and they streamlined the animations for pure speed, and while the twins have their own unique styles, they just look way less stylish than Arnu in my opinion, and removing manual jumping really wasn't ideal either. This also brings us to the heart of the debate with Syndicate. The rope launcher feels fun, but there's no denying it almost completely guts the challenge of parkour. That satisfaction you got from nailing a climb is mostly gone, and it feels replaced by just hitting a button. And a lot of people feel this was the exact moment the series decided to pick accessibility over skill, as you were kind of forced to use the rope launcher because of how the map is designed. Overall, Syndicate's parkour feels a bit like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a super smooth and entertaining system that works perfectly for its open world, but on the other hand, it really was the end of an era, setting the stage for the giant open worlds and more simplified movement that would come to define the series next. But as the franchise moved to ancient Egypt, did the parkour we knew and loved truly die? Or did it simply transform into something that might just be better than we give it credit for? And that brings us to 2017 and Assassin's Creed Origins, which wasn't just a new chapter, it was a full reboot of the entire series. And this is where the RPG era kicked off, and the parkour we'd known for a decade was pretty much thrown away. The dedicated free run button was gone, and it was replaced with a climb anything system, where you can basically scale any surface you can find, despite wearing some shitty sandals. The classic free running controls are gone, and although this might piss off fans of the RPG trilogy, but traversal honestly feels like it's gone backwards in every way, and it's almost lost all of its depth and style. That massive library of animations from Unity is completely canned and made very simple, and it's honestly repetitive. And that whole idea of finding a line, chaining moves together, and that feeling of expressing yourself through movement is literally all gone. And to add injury to insult, ancient Egypt might look absolutely incredible, but for those of us who actually care about traversal, this is literally the worst setting you could choose, as its huge deserts, wide open areas, and small towns weren't designed to be parkour playgrounds. And personally, I think even if there isn't many opportunities to use traversal, don't scrap the movement foundation you built, find a way to introduce it somehow. And for a lot of us, this was the game where parkour got pretty awful and was pretty much left out to dry. But in the next game, would they push the RPG focus even further, or did they actually manage to find a better balance than we remember? So in 2018, we got Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which went all in on the RPG direction. But now you're in ancient Greece, a world that is even more gigantic and mostly made up of huge open fields and mountains. So even though the movement is still pretty responsive, you just don't get many chances for that classic parkour the series was once known for. And movement just gets the job done, getting you from point A to B with all the style and challenge stripped from it. A mechanic that once embodied Assassin's Creed for a lot of us really started to feel like an afterthought at this point. And overall, once again, we are left with a system that requires no thought and has none of that expressive flair that made the movement so iconic. But what happens when you discover that rock bottom has a bloody basement? And how is it even possible to make a game with basically no traversal even worse. Well, by the time Assassin's Creed Valhalla dropped in 2020, the series had fully embraced its RPG scale, which you either enjoyed or kind of hated, with bigger maps, longer games, and essentially no traversal. But Valhalla does something different. This time, movement does feel heavier, and there is a tangible weight to motions, especially when climbing or pulling up ledges. But that's pretty much it. The movement is still basic, bland, and about as fun as being in the company of an old bastard for 5 minutes. And it does absolutely zilch to recapture the feeling of the older games. The world of 9th century England might be brilliant, but again, it's not tailored for parkour. And the game just simply doesn't care for it. It's just endless sprawling fields and tiny one-story villages. And this repeated disappointment may have been the catalyst for Ubisoft's change of heart in their next game, where the series finally attempts to bring back the movement fans fell in love with. But does it really achieve what it sets out to do? So Mirage released in 2023, and it's a game that felt like a direct response to years of fan outcry, and it promised to return to its roots, and we're back in a single dense city, 9th century Baghdad, that was designed from the ground up for vertical movement. They even brought back classic moves fans have been begging for, like the corner swing, along with a few new animations that actually look pretty good. And on the surface, it's a massive step up, as Basim moves way better than Ivor, and the system looks closer to the classic games. But what will be immediately noticeable is just how damn slow it is. It literally feels like you've cacked your pants and are running and climbing in slow motion most of the time. And playing all these games back to back makes it even more noticeable, and it just feels kind of sluggish. And the reason for that feeling really comes down to the game's DNA, as it was built on Valhalla's engine. So even though it's trying to be like the classic games again, it's still held back by its foundation. And despite the movement being light years better than the RPG trilogy and having a map that's actually designed for it, Mirage still swaps out Unity's huge, ambitious animation system for something basic, slow, and kind of clunky. However, the upcoming DLC does look promising, and I am feeling positive about it. Mirage's parkour does feel like a step forward in some ways, but overall, it massively fails to recapture the feeling of Unity and the classics. But with just one final game left before deciding which one really did it best, can it finally recapture the magic of the classics, or will it prove that the golden age of Assassin's Creed parkour is truly not a thing anymore? And that brings us to Assassin's Creed Shadows, and it's a game that has massively mixed opinions. When you're playing as Naoe, it actually feels like the next logical step from Mirage. Her moves feel fluid, and she's got stylish flips and rolls, making her feel like a proper assassin. We even have a grappling hook, which lets you zip up buildings and swing around, but any type of enjoyment you get from the movement becomes completely redundant as soon as you play as this dump truck. He's slow, sluggish, clunky, and although it's sort of realistic, it's one of the various reasons why players neglect him so much. But I have to say, even with Naoe, the mechanics underneath are still a bit stiff. Getting down from places and transitioning between moves isn't always that smooth, and the whole system just feels so automated and kind of lackluster, especially after playing all these games back to back. Also, once you played 100 hours, I bet 10% of that is actually spent doing parkour, as the Japan setting just doesn't really promote this style of gameplay, and it feels like the opposite to Baghdad in Mirage. Ultimately, it just makes me question whether the game should have just had one main protagonist, so they could focus on aspects of the game like movement way more, instead of developing a second character that so many players choose not to use most of the time. So, after all that, we have to answer the ultimate question. After more than 15 years of evolution from the rooftops of Jerusalem to the streets of Paris to endless shrines in Japan, what game truly did parkour the best? And have we been blinded by nostalgia? Aside from the fact the RPG trilogy ignored traversal for the most part, I feel like this series has constantly wrestled with whether parkour should be a challenging skill you master or a cinematic tool that can be easily learned. But as much as I love the challenge of the first few games and how they mostly hold up well, when I set nostalgia aside, I just don't find the movement all that fun anymore. And out of everything I replayed, there is one game that I think does it best overall. It's not overly punishing, it's so satisfying, it still feels modern, and it's backed by one of the best designed settings in the series, and that is AC Unity. And yes, it's not perfect, but it built upon the classics, it had the best animations, it doesn't feel dated, and it's still so fun to play regardless of whether you are a die-hard fan or not. And to compare what we had here with recent games is just laughable in a way, and it's truly sad how neglected this aspect of the game has become, despite it once being one of AC's biggest identities, and I hope one day it does return to form. But let me know in the comments whether you agree or not, as I'm sure this will massively divide opinions. And to see my brutally honest take on whether the old AC games really were as good as we remember, or whether any of them are actually kind of overrated, click the video on screen, you definitely don't want to miss this. Thank you guys for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.